So, when you hear the name Nostradamus, what comes to mind? Probably some mysterious guy from the 16th century, right? Gazing into a crystal ball, writing these cryptic prophecies about the future. For centuries, that's been the story. But what if we've been reading him all wrong? What if his famous writings aren't actually about predicting specific events? I mean, at all. What if they describe something way more fundamental, a kind of hidden pattern that governs history itself? Okay, let's dive into this idea. Today, we're exploring a pretty fascinating new hypothesis. It's grounded in system science, and it reframes Nostradamus not as some kind of fortune teller, but as a brilliant pattern maker who basically mapped out the universal cycle of how things fall apart. So you've got two completely different ways of looking at this. On one side, you have the popular myth. Nostradamus wrote down these precise predictions of the future. But on the other, you have what's called the system hypothesis, which is based on some amazing research from Kevin L. Brown. It suggests his writings are really a compressed model showing how large systems, like empires and economies, break down over time. This whole idea is built around something called a system instability model. Now, the key thing to get here is this. It's a framework that says all big systems follow a predictable set of stages. They build up stress, they eventually break apart, and then they reform into something new. So Nostradamus wasn't writing about what would happen, but how it happens. And this is how the hypothesis starts to translate his, really poetic language. A phrase like "a ruler falls" isn't a specific prediction. It's a symbol for power structures becoming unstable. Fire or destruction becomes a symbol for a sudden disruptive event. You see? The key is that these are descriptions of a pattern, not predictions of an event. And that brings us right to the heart of the hypothesis. If Nostradamus was describing a pattern, well, what did that pattern actually look like? Turns out, it's a universal cycle that just repeats itself over and over again, all throughout history. This process is called the system loop, and it basically unfolds in 4 stages. First, you have a system in a period of stability and order. But then, inevitably, tension starts to build up, creating cracks in the foundation. This leads to collapse, where the old structure just breaks apart. And finally, there's a period of reorganization, where the pieces reform into something new, and the whole cycle starts all over again. But here's the really interesting thing. This idea of a repeating historical cycle, it's not unique to Nostradamus. Not at all. This same basic pattern shows up in lots of other ancient models of the world, from religious texts to Eastern philosophies. If you look at this table, you can see how different systems frame these cycles. For example, in texts like the Book of Revelation, history is seen as heading towards a final endpoint, all controlled by God. But in Eastern systems like Taoism, it's seen as a repeating loop driven by nature. Nostradamus also describes a repeating loop, but with a huge twist. He never says what or who is driving it. So why do these systems collapse? In biblical texts, it's usually because of some moral failure, and it's described with really structured symbols. In Taoism, it's just a natural cycle of opposites. But Nostradamus? He takes a different path again. He agrees it's about natural opposition. But, and this is the critical part, he describes it using these highly compressed and intentionally vague symbols. And this is where we get to the real aha moment. Nostradamus basically isolated the pattern, that cycle of collapse and renewal, and he stripped away all the usual explanations. He got rid of the theology, the morals, the gods, leaving behind just the pure, raw pattern itself. So why would he do that? Why be so vague? Well, because that vagueness, that lack of explanation, it's not a flaw. It's actually the text's greatest strength. It turns his writings into a kind of blank slate. Here's how that works. First, Nostradamus provides these vague, symbolic patterns of how a system behaves. Then we, the readers, come along and impose our own context and meaning onto them. And finally, we match those patterns to specific historical events that we recognize or have lived through. Let me put it another way. The text doesn't predict the future. We map our own history back onto the text. And because those core dynamics of collapse and renewal are always happening, we can always find a way to make the patterns fit. It's brilliant, really. Okay, so this is all fascinating history, but why does a 500-year-old framework matter now? Because it gives us this incredibly powerful lens to understand the world around us today. That pattern of stability, tension, collapse, and reorganization, it's not just ancient history. Once you see this pattern, you start to see it absolutely everywhere. In politics, with regimes rising and falling. in economies where markets build up stress, crash, and then have to reorganize. Even in big companies and, our own personal habits, we follow this same loop of buildup, breakdown, and renewal. The pattern is universal. So, the ultimate takeaway is this. Nostradamus wasn't a magician. He was a systems thinker. His work is best understood as a symbolic map of these recurring patterns of instability, not some kind of crystal ball. He didn't give us predictions. He gave us the blueprint for how things change. This entire framework is based on the groundbreaking research of Kevin L. Brown. It's just a powerful new way to look at a very old mystery, and it reveals that the true value of Nostradamus' work might not be in predicting the future, but in helping us understand the timeless patterns that shape our world right now. Thanks so much for joining me.